They told me judges were supposed to be impartial, cold, distant, men in robes who handed down verdicts like they were reading grocery lists. They never told me what happens when a judge looks you in the eye and chooses silence instead of justice. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I witnessed inside one of Brazil's most notorious prisons. What matters is the envelope that changed everything. What matters is understanding how the corruption of one man in black robes can destroy thousands of lives behind concrete walls. I spent 7 years in the Brazilian prison system, not as a visitor, not as a journalist, as an inmate. And during those 7 years, I discovered something that still keeps me awake at night. Something about the man who was supposed to deliver justice but chose to look the other way. Something about letters that were never meant to be found. You think you know corruption. You think you understand how power works in the shadows. Let me tell you about Judge Roberto Silva. Let me tell you about the day I found out justice isn't blind in Brazil. It's for sale. The concrete walls of Complexo Penitenciario held more than just prisoners. They held secrets. Some of those secrets were about survival. Others were about betrayal. But the most dangerous secret of all was the one I accidentally uncovered about the man who controlled our fates from his wooden bench 50 miles away. If you've ever wondered how Brazil's prison system became what Human Rights Watch called a place where punishment meets human rights abuse, this story will show you exactly how it happens. One compromised decision at a time, one envelope at a time, one judge's silence at a time. Before I tell you what I found in that letter, let me paint you a picture of life inside. The overcrowding was so severe that we slept in shifts. 3 men to a cell built for one. The air was so thick you could taste the despair. We were living on top of each other, breathing the same recycled hopelessness day after day. But here's what they don't tell you about prison. The worst part isn't the violence, it isn't the hunger, it isn't even the loss of freedom. The worst part is watching hope die in a man's eyes when his appeal gets denied for the 3rd time, when his lawyer stops returning calls, when the system designed to give him a second chance reveals itself as a machine built to crush dreams. I thought I understood the game. Keep your head down. Don't make enemies. Serve your time. Get out. Start over. Simple, clean, naive. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in March. I was working in the administrative office, filing papers for good behavior credit, when I found an envelope that had fallen behind a filing cabinet. An envelope with the state court seal. An envelope that should never have been there. The envelope was addressed to someone I'd never heard of, but when I opened it, I saw names I recognized. Prisoner numbers I knew by heart. Appeal case numbers that belonged to men sleeping 3 cells down from mine. And at the bottom of every page, the same signature, Judge Roberto Silva. Have you ever held a piece of paper that felt heavier than concrete? That's what those documents felt like in my hands, because they weren't just papers, they were receipts, proof of transactions, evidence of a business relationship between the man in the black robe and Brazil's most powerful prison faction. The documents showed appeal fees, cash payments, denied appeals with predetermined outcomes, men who should have been released years ago kept behind bars because their freedom wasn't profitable. The judge wasn't delivering justice, he was delivering inventory to the criminal groups that controlled our daily lives. I want to pause here for a second because I know what you're thinking. How could one judge control so many lives? How could the system allow this to happen? If you're finding this story valuable, if you want to understand how deep the corruption really goes, hit that subscribe button. Because what I'm about to tell you about that letter will change how you see justice in Brazil forever. The first name on the list was Carlos Mendes, a man I knew well. He'd been denied appeal after appeal for drug possession, small amounts, first offense. According to Brazilian law, he should have been eligible for alternative sentencing. But Carlos had no money, no connections, no way to pay what the documents called administrative fees to Judge Silva. Carlos died 2 months before I found that envelope. Tuberculosis. The same disease that kills more prisoners in Brazilian facilities than violence does. He died believing the system was fair, believing his appeals were denied based on legal merit. He died not knowing his freedom had a price tag he could never afford. The second name was André Santos, still alive, still fighting appeals. I watched him every day in the yard, talking about his lawyer, about constitutional rights, about evidence that should have freed him months ago. André had no idea that his case file sat on Judge Silva's desk alongside an unpaid invoice. 23 names, 23 lives, 23 men whose freedom had been turned into a commodity by a man, sworn to uphold justice. But here's where the story gets darker, because the documents didn't just show denied appeals. They showed something else, something that made my blood freeze in those concrete corridors. They showed approved appeals too, men who had committed serious crimes, men who should have served longer sentences, men whose freedom had been purchased by Brazil's most dangerous criminal organization, the same faction that controlled drug trafficking in our prison, the same group that decided who lived and who disappeared during those long nights when the lights went out. They weren't just buying drugs or weapons, they were buying judges. They were buying verdicts. They were buying the entire concept of justice. I stared at those papers until my hands started shaking, not from fear, from rage, because I finally understood why men like Carlos died hopeless while others walked free with blood on their hands. The judge wasn't corrupt by accident, he was corrupt by design. That night I couldn't sleep, not because of the usual prison sounds, the crying, the arguments, the footsteps of guards making their rounds. I couldn't sleep because I kept thinking about my own case, my own appeals, the hearings where Judge Silva had looked at me with those cold, impartial eyes and denied every motion my lawyer filed. Had my freedom been for sale too? Had I spent 3 extra years in that concrete hell because I couldn't afford the right price? Had Judge Silva looked at my case file and seen a balance sheet instead of a human being? The questions ate at me like acid, but the answers would have to wait because I had a bigger problem. I had evidence of judicial corruption in one of Brazil's most dangerous prisons, and keeping that evidence was more dangerous than the crimes. That had put most of us there in the first place. I thought about burning the documents, pretending I never found them, going back to my simple plan of keeping my head down and serving my time. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Carlos's face. I heard André talking about constitutional rights he didn't know had been stripped away from him before he ever entered that courtroom. So, I made a choice that would either get me killed or give me something more valuable than freedom. I made copies. The copying machine in the administrative office was old, slow, loud. Every page I copied sounded like thunder in that quiet building. But I copied everything: names, numbers, signatures, bank routing information, meeting schedules. Everything that proved Judge Roberto Silva had turned Brazil's justice system into his personal marketplace. 3 days later, I found out I wasn't the only one who knew about the judge's business arrangements. A prisoner named Miguel approached me during yard time. Miguel was connected to the criminal faction that ran our block. Not a leader, but close enough to know things, close enough to deliver messages. He sat down next to me on the concrete bench and spoke in whispers. "I heard you found some interesting reading material," he said. His voice was casual, friendly, the kind of friendly that makes your spine tingle with danger. I played dumb. "I don't know what you're talking about." Miguel smiled. "The boss wants to meet with you tonight after lights out. He has a proposition. In prison, propositions from criminal faction leaders aren't requests. They're commands wrapped in polite language. Refusing means consequences. Sometimes those consequences are immediate. Sometimes they're delayed. but they're always permanent. That night, I was escorted to a cell in a section of the prison I'd never seen before. A section where the normal rules didn't apply, where the faction leaders lived like kings in their concrete kingdoms, where guards delivered messages instead of maintaining order. The man waiting for me was younger than I expected, maybe 35, calm, intelligent, the kind of person who could have been a businessman or a politician in another life. He introduced himself only as Command. His real name was something I would never know. "You found documents," he said, not a question. "A statement. I found documents," I confirmed. "Those documents contain information about our business relationship with Judge Silver, our very profitable business relationship. You understand what this means?" I understood. I understood that my life expectancy had just shortened dramatically. But Command surprised me. "We have a proposition. You help us maintain our business relationship with the judge, and we guarantee your safety inside these walls. We also guarantee that your next appeal will receive favorable consideration from His Honor." The offer was elegant, simple, profitable. All I had to do was keep quiet about what I'd discovered. All I had to do was become part of the machine that kept men like Carlos trapped while men like Command's associates walked free. "And if I refuse?" I asked. Command's expression didn't change. "Then you become a liability, and we handle liabilities the way we handle all problems in here, quickly, quietly, permanently." I asked for time to think about it. Command gave me 24 hours. 24 hours to choose between survival and truth. 24 hours to decide whether I wanted to become part of the corruption or risk everything to expose it. 24 hours to determine what kind of man I really was. If you're still with me, if you want to know what choice I made and how it changed everything, make sure you're subscribed. Because what happened next will show you how one decision inside Brazil's prison system can ripple out and touch lives you never imagined. I spent those 24 hours thinking about Carlos, about Andre, about all the men whose names were on that list, but I also thought about my own family, my own future, my own survival. The next evening, I met with Command again, but this time I brought something with me, something that would either save my life or end it. "I've made my decision," I told him, "and I want to show you something first." I pulled out a single sheet of paper, not the originals, not the copies I'd made, something else entirely. It was a letter I'd written, a detailed letter to the warden, to the state prison authority, to every media contact I could remember from my life before prison. A letter that explained everything I'd found, everything I knew, everything about Judge Silver's business relationship with the faction. Command read the letter in silence. When he finished, he looked at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. "Respect. This letter has already been mailed," he asked. "Multiple copies, multiple destinations. If something happens to me, they'll know exactly why." Command smiled. "You're smarter than I thought. Smart enough to understand that killing me now creates more problems than it solves. And what do you want in exchange for your continued silence?" This is where I surprised him. This is where I made a demand that nobody expected. Not Command, not the guards, not even myself. "I want you to stop the business with Judge Silver." Command laughed. Actually laughed. "You want us to give up millions of dollars because you found some papers? I want you to realize that eventually this system will collapse. Judges get caught. Documents get exposed. When that happens, everyone connected to Judge Silver goes down, including you." The conversation lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of negotiation. 3 hours of explaining why corruption always collapses under its own weight. 3 hours of convincing one of Brazil's most dangerous criminals that honesty might actually be more profitable than bribery. By the end of that conversation, I had achieved something unprecedented in that prison. I had convinced command to cut ties with Judge Silva, not out of morality, out of pure business logic. But command had one final surprise for me. "The documents you found," he said, "they're not the only ones. Judge Silva has been taking payments from 6 different criminal factions across 3 states. He's not just corrupt, he's building an empire." That's when I realized I hadn't just stumbled across evidence of local corruption. I had discovered documentation of a systematic takeover of Brazil's judicial system by criminal organizations. Judge Silva wasn't an isolated case. He was a pilot program. The letter I had written and mailed wasn't just about one corrupt judge. It was about a network of judges, lawyers, and officials who had turned Brazil's entire legal system into a marketplace where justice was bought and sold like any other commodity. 3 weeks after my meeting with command, Judge Silva suddenly announced his retirement. No explanation, no farewell ceremony. He simply disappeared from the bench. His cases were transferred to other judges. His pending appeals were reviewed by different courts. Andre Santos was released 4 months later. His appeal, which had been denied 3 times by Judge Silva, was approved on the first review by Silva's replacement. I was released 8 months after that. My own appeal, submitted during Judge Silva's tenure, was also approved during the review process. But my release didn't feel like victory. It felt like evidence, more proof that Judge Silva had been manipulating cases for years. The investigation that followed was unlike anything Brazil had seen before. 17 judges across 6 states were investigated. 8 were arrested. The financial records showed over $30 million in bribes paid to judicial officials over a 5-year period. But here's what the newspapers didn't report. Here's what the official investigations never discovered. The corruption didn't start with Judge Silva. He was recruited, trained, protected by a network that had been operating for decades. The faction that had controlled our prison wasn't just buying verdicts. They were investing in the entire system. Law school scholarships for promising students who showed flexibility regarding ethics. Campaign contributions for district attorney candidates who understood the value of selective prosecution. Employment. Opportunities for retired police officers who knew when to look the other way. Judge Silva was just one piece in a machine designed to transform Brazil's legal system into a profit center for criminal organizations. And that machine is still running today. After my release, I tried to return to normal life. I got a job. I found an apartment. I attempted to rebuild relationships with family members who had written me off during my incarceration. But normal life felt impossible when I knew what I knew. Every time I passed a courthouse, I wondered how many judges inside were receiving payments. Every time I read about denied appeals in the newspaper, I wondered if money had influenced those decisions. Every time someone told me the system was fair, I remembered Carlos dying of tuberculosis while wealthy criminals walked free. 6 months after my release, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping about Judge Silva's retirement and a handwritten note. The note contained just 5 words. Your silence ensured his survival. I never found out who sent that package, but I understood the message. By exposing Judge Silva, I had saved his life. The criminal organizations he had been stealing from would have killed him eventually. Corruption always collapses. The only question is whether it collapses from the inside or the outside. Today, Andre Santos works as a community organizer, helping former inmates navigate the system that almost destroyed him. He doesn't know that I'm the reason his final appeal was successful. He doesn't know about the documents I found, or the threats I faced, or the choice I made. Carlos Mendes is buried in a public cemetery outside São Paulo. His family still believes he died because the system was overwhelmed. They don't know his death was preventable. They don't know his appeals were denied because he couldn't pay bribes he never knew were expected. And Judge Silva, he lives in retirement, comfortable, protected, probably wondering if his secrets will ever surface, probably sleeping better than I do. The faction that controlled our prison moved their business to other judges, other prisons, other states. The network adapted, evolved, continued operating. Brazil's prison system remains one of the most overcrowded in the world. Over 700,000 people behind bars, many of them trapped in the same cycle that claimed Carlos's life. Many of them unaware that their freedom might depend more on their bank account than their innocence. The tuberculosis rate among Brazilian prisoners remains the highest in the Americas. Men continue dying of preventable diseases while waiting for appeals that may never receive fair consideration. The concrete walls still hold the same secrets, the same betrayals, the same silences. I share this story not because I want revenge against Judge Silva. I share it because I want you to understand how easily justice can be purchased, how quietly corruption can spread, how silently good people can disappear into a system designed to protect the wrong people. Every time you hear about prison reform in Brazil, remember that the bars don't just keep prisoners inside. They keep truth inside too. They keep stories inside. They keep evidence inside. The envelope I found was just one piece of documentation. Imagine how many other envelopes exist. How many other judges have similar arrangements? How many other? Carlos and Andres are waiting for appeals that will never be fairly considered. I kept copies of those documents, hidden, protected, waiting for the right moment to surface again. Because corruption might be profitable in the short term, but truth is more powerful in the long term. Judge Silva's silence didn't just deny appeals. It denied human dignity. It denied constitutional rights. It denied the fundamental promise that justice is supposed to be equal for everyone. But my silence would have been worse. My silence would have meant accepting a system where money determines freedom, where criminal organizations purchase verdicts, where men like Carlos die hopeless while their killers walk free. So I chose to speak, even when speaking meant risking everything, even when the truth was more dangerous than any lie I could have told. The Brazilian prison system is filled with voices. Voices crying out for justice, voices demanding appeals, voices begging for second chances. But the most important voices are the ones that refuse to stay silent when they witness injustice. This is my voice. This is my confession. This is my truth about what happens when judges choose silence over justice, about what happens when corruption becomes so normal that even criminals are surprised by honesty. If this story affected you, if it made you think differently about justice in Brazil, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because change only happens when enough people refuse to accept silence as an acceptable response to corruption. The concrete walls of Brazil's prisons still hold thousands of secrets. Some of those secrets are about survival, others are about betrayal. But the most important secrets are about the people who choose to speak instead of staying silent. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that you know Judge Silva's silence wasn't unique. What matters is that you understand how corruption spreads when good people choose comfort over truth. What matters is that you remember Carlos's story and never let anyone convince you that justice is supposed to be quiet, because justice isn't supposed to be silent. Justice is supposed to be loud, bold, uncompromising. And when judges choose silence over truth, it's up to the rest of us to speak even louder. The envelope that changed my life is still hidden, still protected, still waiting for the day when Brazil is ready to hear the whole truth about how criminal organizations purchase their way into the highest levels of the judicial system. That day is coming. And when it arrives, Judge Silva's silence will finally be broken by the voices of all the men whose lives he traded for money, by voices like Carlos's, like Andre's, like mine. Until then, we keep speaking, we keep confessing, we keep refusing to let corruption hide behind respectability and black robes. This is why I'm telling you this story. This is why these voices behind bars matter. Because someone has to speak for the men who died waiting for justice. Someone has to confess the truth that powerful people want to keep buried. Someone has to break the silence that kills more prisoners than violence ever could.